So reading the title of your book, I automatically the mind went automatically to, not that I'm comparing you to him, but it went automatically to James Herriot and all the books that he wrote, and creature great and small. And it's really like that now that you are dealing with all possible kind of creature, which is to me is so fascinating. But now the surprise that we got for you, we have some new graduates that have sent videos with questions for you.
Okay.
Let's see. Are you happy? Are you happy to try to give them an answer?
Happy to embarrass myself, because the problem, as everyone knows, is there's so many animals and so many different problems. I'm sure I won't know half of it, but
Possibly.
we can have a go.
What was the animal? That animal that you told me you had to repair the leg? It was this giant rodent. How is the you
Capybara.
Exactly. I was not even aware that it exists in the world, such an animal. So you see. So Paolo, have we got our new graduates with the questions for Romain?
Hello, I am Ilse. I am 6, 8. What is your favorite animal? Mine is me is a dog. Bye.
Good evening, Dr. Pizzi. My name is Mattia and I'm 7-year-old. I would like to know how heavy a male lion is. Thank you.
Hello, I am Finn. I have a question for you. What is the weirdest animal you have ever treated? Bye.
Good evening, Dr. Pizzi. My name is Dante and I'm 10 years old and I go to 5th year primary school. I would like to know how many species of sloth live in the forest.
Hello everyone, I'm Greta. I was born in England, but I'm Italian. My mum and dad are Italian. I'm in year 1 primary school. Komodo dragons are there in zoos, and how many foods do they have to eat to be healthy and safe? How many cubs does a snow leopard have, and what's its favorite food?
Let me try and answer some of them. Some of them are really easy. Some of them are a little bit more difficult than they may at first appear. So I think probably the easiest one is a male lion. So I have quite a few lions that I look after, and I've got to go and do some more lions in Ethiopia and South Africa later in the year. So a large male lion, wild or in good condition in captivity, is approximately 200 kilograms. That's a good ballpark. But that differs. If they get a bit obese, they can go up to about 240 kilograms. And if they come from a desert region, then they tend to be much smaller. So if you see lions in, say, Namib Desert, some of the males will only reach about 120, 140 kilograms. So you will see the same with many animals that live in deserts. So bears that live in the deserts in China, the brown bears that live there are much smaller than the brown bears that we'll get in Europe. So hopefully that answers the question about how much lions weigh. Now, some of the others a little bit more tricky. So the sloth question is a good one. So there's 6 species of sloth at the moment. They've got a variety of boring names, and I probably can't remember all of them, though I think my daughter can because she likes sloths. But those 6 species of sloths, there's 4 species that are called 3-toed, and there's 2 species that are called 2-toed, and it depends on how many toes they've got in their front legs, because they've all got 3 toes at the back. But the reason that question is really interesting is that what makes a species? So we love to put animals into categories, and we decide that there's so many species of this, and there's so many species of that, and there's so many subspecies, and then it keeps changing because our understanding of animal changes. And so we forget that nature is not little boxes, and these animals have evolved over thousands or millions of years, and at some stage we decide that there's enough differences that they're actually different subspecies or species. And so this has changed a lot over the years, in that the number of species of penguins constantly changes depending on what, if they think, say, the southern rockhopper and the northern rockhopper are actually different species, or if they're subspecies. And for example, the number of different tiger subspecies constantly changes. There were many subspecies of tiger, but now we've done some genetic work. We think that there may only be very few different subspecies, and then there's differences depending on where they live. And the reason these things are problematic, and they make my life difficult as a vet, and they make your life difficult if you work with the vet, is these things determine what we do. So we have to decide with the time that we've got how we work to save animals. So if we decided that it didn't matter what a subspecies was, then we just had to preserve some genetics for tigers. It's a much easier job. If we decided that every tiny little subspecies of tiger living in a different region is equally valuable, it's a lot more work, and there's a lot of challenges to protect some of them. Now, the Sumatran tigers living in Sumatra are in a lot more trouble than, say, tigers living in parts of Russia, which we'd call Amur tigers. But actually, are they really different, or are they the same sort of animal with some differences that they've developed where they live, and they're playing the same role in the ecosystem? Now, I don't have answers for any of these things, because I don't think there are, but they're things that we have to think about when we take on projects and we're asked to do things as a vet, because otherwise we can end up wasting a lot of time and money, and actually accomplishing very little. So we'll talk about that a little bit later when we actually get into the presentation. So there were a bunch of other questions. Some of them are quite interesting. So Komodo dragons, it's difficult to say how much we'd feed them as a fixed quantity. So the beauty about them is that they're a cold-blooded animal. So they're something we call poikilothermic. And again, I'll apologize for those who are very erudite that it's too simplified, and I'll apologize to the children if it's too complicated. But basically, we always say that these were primitive animals, reptiles, and so they didn't regulate their own body temperature. But actually, they're supremely well evolved. They're not primitive at all. They've just decided on a different strategy to us. So Komodo dragons, in the old days, in the zoo, what we would do is we would actually feed them sort of small regular meals every day, just like we would eat. That's not a very clever way of doing things, because in the wild, they'd actually go and hunt something quite large, and then they'd gorge completely, and then they'd sit around being lazy and it digest it, and they may not eat for several weeks. So it's a really clever strategy, because if you don't eat for a week, you're probably going to get ill. But if you're, say, a Komodo dragon, or more extreme, if you're a saltwater crocodile living in Australia, you could have a massive meal and then not eat for a year. So imagine you go home for Christmas, you see all your family, you eat a huge amount of food, and then you go, see you next year for Christmas, and you don't have to eat again in between. How can that be a more primitive way of living? So the old ways that they described in textbooks of animals being more highly developed or primitive meant we didn't really understand them, because they're really supremely evolved for the lifestyle that they need to live. So the question with the Komodo dragon is not how much they eat regularly, but how frequently and how big the meal that is they eat. So if they eat a really big meal, they don't have to eat for a long time, and they can eat a really massive amount, more than, a quarter to a third of their body weight at a sit, and then they'll just laze around for a week or two and just slowly start to digest that meal. Okay, and with snow leopards, there's a question on snow leopards there, and I'm getting a bit old and I'm a bit senile, so I'll forget half the questions and I will apologize. But with snow leopards, when we watch TV, we'll see them all in these very, very isolated rocky mountains. And the reality is that many of the animals, what we think is natural now, is not actually where they occurred. So snow leopards actually also occurred much lower down mountains, where there was a lot of vegetation and a lot more animals. But what's happened over hundreds of years is that as the human population has expanded and our farm animals have expanded, we've pushed these animals out to the extremes of where they would normally live, where we can't farm or we don't live. So we only see snow leopards in these little rocky outclips because no one wants to really live there. There's not many people, so they don't clash with us. But naturally, when there weren't a lot of people, they actually occurred in many more diverse habitats. And there were actually records of snow leopards killing young giant pandas and eating them, not something that you would see today because those habitats are very separated now.
So they were asking which is
Aha.
your favorite animal and the weirdest animal you have.
Yeah, those are the ones that I missed. So I saw Finn asked what's the weirdest animal that I've treated. So I've treated some pretty bizarre animals. So we'll talk about it, but I've worked with very, very small, really, really endangered snails, and we'll come back to them because they may seem boring, but they're more important, those little snails, than many of them, probably any other animal I've ever worked with. But probably the weirdest animal I've treated is that I treated a group of sick jellyfish that were in a zoo, and that's got to be one of the strangest animals and most difficult animals to treat. But I've been lucky. I've worked with sharks and orangutans and all sorts of things, but I think the jellyfish are probably the weirdest. I'm afraid I don't have a favorite animal because I think what happens is it changes over time. So if I work with a type of animal for a lot of time, and I start to understand it a little bit better, then I start to become really fond of it. So it changes. So I used to work with lots of penguins, and I love penguins, and I've worked with pandas and orangutans. And the more you work with something, whether it's beavers or little lizards or ants, that leafcutter ants, you become attached to or interested in all of them. So I like everything that's alive. I even like plants. So I'm very, very fond of trees. They live very long. They're really interesting. And there's a whole load of interesting things there. Did you know that plants can actually learn? And they seem to have memories. And we know they can communicate. So the whole living world is really, really amazing. Even plants are amazing.
I think it was a concept that was explained, forgive me if I'm wrong, in the movie Avatar about the plants or the vegetation communicating. And anyway, so I don't think it was.
There is some science. They've shown that what can happen is they can take, say, sensitive mimosa, which is a little plant that I will see in places like Sierra Leone. It's a little plant with fine little leaves, and what will happen is if you touch them or rain falls on them, the leaves fold up to protect themselves, and they would do that for rain, for wind, for animals trying to eat them. But what they can actually do is they can train the plant by dropping it, and then what will happen is they found that they can actually teach the plant that nothing bad is going to happen, and it won't close its leaves after it gets habituated to that. We know that plants have memory because a Venus flytrap has to actually be able to count and memorize how many times those hairs have been touched. So there's something complex going on there, that you've got plants that can count and can remember things. And then we know that they can communicate with their roots, with little fungal hyphae that spread between the roots of the trees in the forest. We know that they can feed elderly trees between them. There's all sorts of fascinating things. There's even some science that shows that trees can taste. So if you break off a branch from the tree, it may not do anything, but if a deer nibbles that off, and if a wind breaks it off, there are slightly different reactions. And so it appears that there are substances in the deer saliva when it chews on a tree's leaves, beech trees in Europe, that actually the tree recognizes it's been eaten, and what it will do is it will actually change the chemicals that it gives out into the leaves to make it unpalatable. But if you do the same thing with your hands, it doesn't fool the plant. So plants may even have a sense of taste. So there's so much we don't even understand about animals, but as we delve into the natural world, as we're losing it all the time, the tragedy is we realize how little we know about how interconnected all of life is.
Absolutely. And Romain, we have heard a question from Greta, which you have answered. But am I allowed to say that you sent a nice video to Greta where we saw a little sweet creature? And if you are okay, I would like to send this video.
Sure, that's all right. It's just a little wallaby that was being hand reared, so she sent me a video, so I sent it back.
Paolo, shall we see the video with the little wallaby, please?
Greta, just a very quick video to say hi, I'm Romain. Hopefully you'll enjoy my talk when it comes up, and I'll show you someone very special. I'll just turn the camera around. Let's look here. So hopefully you can see him. This is Dash. He is a small Palmer wallaby baby that we've had to hand rear because his mother rejected him. So you can see he's actually living at the moment in this little artificial pouch, and he's just come out for an explore. So he's also saying hi. Anyway, that's bye from me now, and hopefully see you soon.
Romain, I'm a big fan, so every little story you got, I would say
That's kind, but I think that the one thing that I have to say, being a vet, is that my job's actually really easy. We do the fun bit, and that we see sick animals and we treat them. But there's always an amazing group of people who actually do all the lifelong care of many of the animals, whether they're in a rescue center or they're being an orangutan being rehabilitated or a wallaby being hand reared. It's very easy for me as a vet to come along and treat some diarrhea or do an operation. But a baby otter that I might do something on, it'll take almost 2 years to go back to the wild, and there's a bunch of really dedicated people that will look after the otter. So my job's the easiest and the least important, because although everyone thinks it's very exciting, it's actually the other people around that I'm very dependent on, otherwise nothing would actually work.
I agree. This is very important to reiterate this. And yes,